The final biblical sign has been triggered, and this moment stands apart from any other because it carries the weight of generations who long to witness what we are seeing right now. From the prophets of old to the early church believers, countless hearts waited for the day when prophecy would not simply be studied but lived. Today we are the ones living it. The world has shifted into a place that no longer resembles the slow, steady unfolding of history. Instead, everything is accelerating at a pace that feels supernatural, as if an invisible hand is pulling back the veil and revealing God's timetable. When Jesus told his disciples to watch for signs, he wasn't giving abstract ideas or poetic warnings. He described events, patterns, and spiritual climates that would mark the final season before his return. Now, those signs are not only appearing, they are converging, happening simultaneously, intensifying with every passing day. This moment matters more than any other because humanity has crossed the line spiritually, morally, and prophetically. For centuries, people could argue that the signs were far away, that the world still had time, that prophecy was unfolding slowly. But today, no one who is spiritually awake can deny that something unprecedented is happening. The final sign is not just a symbol. It is a global shift, a divine interruption, a final countdown signaling that the age of grace is nearing its climax. It matters because it means the things Jesus spoke about are not future possibilities, they are present realities. The earth itself is responding, creation is groaning, and the spiritual atmosphere feels charged with urgency. The world is no longer resting on the edge of prophecy. It has stepped into the center of it. This moment also matters because God is speaking louder than ever, yet many hearts are more distracted than ever. The final sign is a reminder that God is still in control, still on the throne, and still keeping every promise he ever made. It matters because the world needs to know that history is not random, that chaos is not accidental, and that evil does not have the final word. When the final sign activates, it is heaven's way of telling humanity that time is short, but mercy is still available. It is God's call for his people to wake up, to lift their heads, and to recognize that redemption is drawing near. It matters because it separates the casual believer from the committed one, the watcher from the sleeper, the lukewarm from the burning-hearted. But perhaps the greatest reason this moment matters is because it is proof that God has not forgotten his people. Every prophecy fulfilled is a message of faithfulness. Every sign is a reminder that Jesus meant every word he said. When the final sign appears, it confirms that the promise of the rapture is real. The return of Christ is certain, and eternal hope is not a fairy tale. It is destiny. This moment matters because it stirs the soul, awakens the spirit, and forces every person to make a choice, to draw closer to God or drift further away. The final sign is not merely an event. It is a divine invitation, an invitation to surrender, to prepare, to return to God with passion, urgency, and expectation. And for the believer who understands the times, it sparks a fire that fear cannot extinguish and a hope that darkness cannot silence. The world's spiritual decline has reached a point that mirrors the days of Noah and Lot, not just in isolated events, but in the very atmosphere that surrounds humanity. In the days of Noah, the Bible tells us that every imagination of the human heart had turned toward evil, and violence filled the earth. People lived without restraint, without reverence, without boundaries. They laughed at Noah, mocked his warnings, and continued in their routines as if judgment was a fictional tale meant for someone else. Today we see this same pattern repeating. People are numbing their consciences, justifying sin, celebrating what God calls wicked, and rejecting what he calls holy. The spiritual blindness is not accidental, it is prophetic. When sin becomes entertainment, when corruption becomes culture, when rebellion becomes identity, these are not simply moral declines, but signs of a world drifting far from God, just as it was before the flood. The days of Lot carried the same weight of moral decay. A city drowning in immorality, a culture intoxicated with pleasure, pride, and perversion. Lot tried to warn them, but they saw nothing wrong with how they lived. They were comfortable in their darkness. They were entertained by their rebellion. They thought nothing could shake their world. But suddenly, judgment fell, not because God was cruel, but because humanity had crossed the final line of rejecting his voice. Today, as we watch society embrace the same attitudes, the same behaviors, and the same spiritual numbness, it becomes impossible to deny that history is repeating itself. The world is pushing God out of its laws, its schools, its families, and even many of its churches. And when God is pushed out, confusion rushes in, chaos takes over, and morality collapses. This spiritual decline is not just noticeable, it is celebrated. People no longer hide their sin, they parade it with pride. Values that once held society together are now mocked, redefined, or discarded. Marriage is reimagined, truth is twisted, identity is confused, and righteousness is labeled hateful. Just like the people of Noah's time, modern society has become addicted to pleasure and indifferent to holiness. Just like the people of Lot's time, multitudes defend sin more passionately than they defend truth. And in the midst of this, the warnings of God feel like background noise to a generation that no longer wants to listen. This is not a random shift. It is exactly what Jesus said would happen before his return. The spiritual decline of our time matters because it reveals the condition of the human heart on a global scale. When a world chooses darkness, darkness becomes normal. When a world chooses lies, truth becomes offensive. When a world chooses rebellion, righteousness becomes strange. This is why Jesus warned that the last days would be like Noah's and Lot's generations. Not to scare us, but to help us recognize the signs. The same spiritual blindness that preceded judgment in ancient times is now spreading across nations, cities, and homes. It is not just the behavior of individuals. It is the collective moral decay of humanity. Yet even in this darkness, there is a message of hope. God spared Noah, God rescued Lot, and God will rescue his people again. The spiritual decline around us is not a sign that God has lost control. It is a sign that his word is being fulfilled and that Christ's return is drawing near. For those who see the truth, this is not a time to panic, but a time to prepare, to stay awake, to stand strong, and to live with a faith that refuses to blend into a collapsing world. The days of Noah and Lot were dark, but God's light still shone. And in this generation of spiritual decline, that same light is calling us to stand apart, stay faithful, and be ready for the moment when Christ comes for his own. The acceleration of global chaos is one of the clearest and most undeniable signs that prophecy is converging all at once in this generation. For centuries, the world has always faced wars, disasters, and political upheaval, but never before have these events overlapped with such speed, intensity, and global reach. Everything seems to be happening all at the same time, as if the earth has entered a prophetic storm with no pause, no slow moments, and no turning back. Jesus warned that in the final days, signs would not simply appear. They would multiply like birth pains, becoming faster, stronger, and more frequent the closer we move toward his return. Today, we are seeing exactly that. What used to take decades now happens in days. What used to shock the world now barely surprises anyone because chaos has become the new normal. Across the globe, nations are rising against nations, alliances are shifting overnight, and conflicts erupt without warning. Economies are collapsing, currencies are weakening, and systems that once felt unshakable now tremble under the weight of uncertainty. Natural disasters are striking with record-breaking force. Earthquakes, floods, fires, storms, all appearing back-to-back like a world groaning in birth pains, just as the Bible foretold. Political confusion sweeps through governments, moral confusion sweeps through societies, and spiritual confusion sweeps through families. What was once stable is now fragile. What was once predictable is now unpredictable. These are not random events. These are prophetic warnings echoing across the earth. What makes this moment different is that all these signs are converging together. It's not just war. It's war mixed with famine, economic instability, moral decay, spiritual deception, and global unrest. It's not just natural disasters. It's disasters happening in places that have never experienced them before. It's not just political turmoil. It's governments collapsing from within, divided by corruption, hatred, and confusion. Every part of the world seems to be shaking, as if God is allowing humanity to see that we are living in the exact season Jesus described. The world is no longer experiencing isolated problems. It is experiencing a worldwide prophetic alignment. At the same time, technology is advancing faster than human morality can keep up. Artificial intelligence, digital currencies, global surveillance systems, and mass communication platforms have created a world where one message can influence billions in seconds. This technological explosion aligns perfectly with end-time prophecy, which describes a time when the world could be controlled, monitored, and unified under a single system. What seemed impossible 2,000 years ago is now simply a software update away. The speed of technology has become another sign of the acceleration the Bible told us to expect. And while the world collapses outwardly, deception rises inwardly. False teachings, counterfeit spirituality, and distorted versions of truth are spreading like wildfire. People are hungry for meaning, but rejecting the God who gives it. Lies travel faster than truth, and emotions overpower discernment. This spiritual chaos is not merely confusion. It is prophecy unfolding. Jesus warned that deception would be one of the most powerful signs of the last days. And today it is everywhere, flooding minds, homes, and even some churches. All these accelerating events point to one powerful truth. Prophecy is not unfolding slowly, it is erupting. The world is not inching toward the final days, it is racing toward them. The convergence of these signs reveals that time is shorter than most people realize. But for the believer who understands what is happening, this is not a time for fear. It is a time for awakening. It is a call to rise, to watch, to prepare, and to stand firm in faith. Because the same Bible that foretold global chaos also promised a rescue, a hope, a glorious return of the King. The convergence of prophecy is not merely a sign of the end. It is a reminder that our redemption is drawing near. The greatest mistake the church is making in this prophetic hour is falling asleep while prophecy is screaming. Never in history has the world displayed such clear signs of Christ's return, yet never has the church been so distracted, divided, or spiritually dull. Many Christians have settled into a comfortable routine where faith is casual, worship is optional, prayer is occasional, and holiness is negotiable. The urgency of the hour has faded under the noise of entertainment, the pressures of life, and the deception of thinking there is still plenty of time. This spiritual sleep is dangerous, not because the signs are unclear, but because they are overwhelmingly obvious. When the church sleeps, darkness grows bold, deception grows stronger, and souls slip further away from God without resistance. Throughout Scripture, God always warned his people to stay awake. Jesus repeatedly told his disciples to watch, to be alert, to stay ready, because the day of his coming would arrive like a thief in the night. But today, while the prophetic clock is ticking louder than ever, many believers live as if nothing is happening. Sermons that speak truth are avoided, messages about repentance are softened, and warnings about the end times are dismissed as fear-mongering. Churches replace conviction with comfort, holiness with hype, and spiritual warfare with positive thinking. And in this spiritual laziness, the enemy has found room to sow confusion, compromise, and unbelief. The tragedy is that many believers do not realize they are asleep. They attend church but lack transformation. They know prophecy but ignore preparation. They speak of faith but rarely walk in obedience. The spiritual slumber is subtle, quiet enough to feel normal, but deadly enough to destroy readiness. This is the same condition Jesus warned about in the parable of the 10 virgins. All 10 knew the bridegroom was coming. All 10 believed in the event. All 10 waited, but only 5 stayed awake and prepared. The other 5 grew tired, comfortable, and careless, and when the moment arrived, it was too late. Their lamps were empty, their hearts were unready, their opportunity was gone. Jesus was not teaching a parable. He was describing the exact condition of the end-time church. The church's sleep today comes from a mix of worldly distractions and spiritual compromise. Instead of being the voice of truth, many believers echo the values of the world. Instead of standing apart, they blend in. Instead of burning with passion, they settle into lukewarm neutrality. The pressure to be accepted, to be liked, to avoid offense has silenced the boldness that once defined the early church. And while believers compromise truth for comfort, the spiritual battle intensifies. The enemy is not sleeping. Evil is not sleeping. Darkness is not sleeping. But the church, God's chosen light, is dimming itself at the very moment it should shine the brightest. This mistake is costly because it blinds the church to the urgency of the hour. When believers sleep, they stop praying with fire, they stop worshiping with passion, they stop pursuing holiness, they stop evangelizing, and they stop expecting Christ's return. The signs become familiar instead of alarming. Prophecies become interesting instead of convicting. The world's chaos becomes normal instead of prophetic. And slowly, the church loses its spiritual sensitivity. When the church stops watching, it stops warning. When it stops warning, the world sinks deeper into darkness without a voice of hope rising to call them out. But even in this condition, God is merciful. He is shaking the church awake through the very signs unfolding around us. He is stirring hearts, reviving dry spirits, and calling his people to rise from their slumber. This is not a moment for fear, but a moment for awakening, a moment to rekindle the fire, to return to prayer, to open the Word, to reject compromise.